I'm happy to take the check from DC, but they are hugely influential over the years and have been for a lot of people coming into the realm of comics. Do you feel that like you take some comfort or joy from that?
No.
You're never gonna pry it out of him. Like, but can I speak to that? Because Brian was such a huge influence on me, honestly. Those books, 100 Bullets, one of the books that made me want to be at Vertigo, like what he was doing at the time too, all across the DCU, and what he did with the New 52, all of it. He's been a huge inspiration to me and a mentor. So, I mean, speaking from experience, your books have had huge impact. So,
and that's like, even to have somebody like Scott to say that to you, overall, I think, and take it, everyone here in the audience have read your work. Do you feel that
All 7 of them?
all 7 of them? Like, this is the problem of putting
eight.
This is the problem of putting a panel on at the first, as soon as the doors open.
Yeah.
Do your process for approaching these well-established characters, do you have one, or do you just sit down and go, right, I'm not going to look at what's come before, I'm going to put together my own idea of what they are, and maybe even try and maybe build upon what's come before? Because, I mean, Scott with Batman is renowned, but even you coming into it as well with a different take on those characters.
Well, I think that one of the things about Batman, and you'll agree with this too, he's like silly putty. I mean, you can do anything with that character as long as you stick to the core. I mean, he can be stretched in a lot of different ways, I think. As far as like process, if I don't have something new to say about these characters, I just won't say it.
Really?
Really.
But even with the likes of The Damned and the Joker graphic novel, I've had people talk to people and friends that have read those books and said that there are fresh ideas and fresh takes on those characters in there.
Oh, I think that, no, I said if I don't have something fresh to say, I won't say it.
Oh, okay, sorry.
what did you think he said?
I thought he said, if I had something fresh to say, I won't say it.
I keep it to myself. I don't know.
But I mean, like, Scott, I mean, like, as you said, there's an influence of Brian. And are you aware of that impact? Like, I mean, does it take somebody like, like for Scott Snyder to say to you, no, you've had an impact on a lot of people?
No, I think 100 Bullets definitely did, because it was, it operated in the real world, which really wasn't happening at Vertigo at the time. When I came into Vertigo, it was all like fairies and elves and shit. And this was, much more grounded. And I think it opened the door for those kinds of stories to be told.
I mean, Vertigo as a label was very groundbreaking across the board. It gave a platform to a lot of writers and creators that would have been outside of what the usual DC stuff would have been. Was that kind of freeing when you were putting 100 Bullets? Because 100 Bullets is such now, and looking back on it, in such a huge scope. Did you think that scope was going to be there going into it? Was that the full plan overall?
It was the plan. I didn't know if we'd get there. 100 Bullets originally, like, Karen turned it down. She said, well, this is a good story, this is a good idea, but I don't want to do it. Or not, I don't want to do it. She says, I don't think it fits in Vertigo.
That's crazy.
And Axel Alonso, who was the editor at the time, said, do you mind if I show this to Jeanette Kahn, who was the publisher at the time? And he sent it to her, and the next morning he got an email from her saying, when are we doing this? So that's how it got done. And originally it was, we were approved for a year. And, it was like, well, if it, doesn't take off, do you think you could wrap it up in 18 issues? And I'm like, yeah, sure. But I lied.
Wow. That's insane. I mean, to hear, like, for any, like, people obviously aren't aware of this, I work at an independent level in comics. So, I mean, looking at that kind of process in Vertigo is surprising. But to hear somebody say, well, look, we'll let it run for 18 and see how it goes. Did that deflate your idea of what the story was going to be? Did you pare back on anything, or did you go, I'm just going to go for it?
It was just like, well, I lied when I said 18. It's like, yes, I can do it. It's like, no, I couldn't do it. It would just end it when it was, when it was over.
It's amazing. I love it. And like, when you were approaching that and putting that story together, did it all come at once? Did you have everything planned out at once, or was it like changing as it progressed? And when you got past those 18 issues, you go, right, now I can really let the story flow, or I can do things I want to do because I'm able to go that level.
I didn't think of the 18 as a number. I mean, when it was pitched, it was, we were figuring about, I think, 72 to 80 issues, and then it kind of grew from there. We expanded it a little bit. I forget why it became 100. It must have been the name. I think I said something once when it was just like, oh shit, I shouldn't have said that. But
And Scott, since we have you here, of course, I'm going to direct some questions towards you because I feel like having Scott Synder just sitting in the corner and not being asked questions is a,
No, it's nice.
you know. But,
I love my son and my wife, but they both snore like chainsaws, like sawing chainsaws in half. And so I was up all night watching the Yankee game, and then woke up just before. So I apologize for being late. I'm really sorry, but yeah. So I'm here for anything.
That's all good. These are watching. I'm going to be an unapologetic baseball fan here because I don't care because I didn't know I was going to be doing this. These are watching the Yankees game, or you just?
Oh yeah, no. I mean, I was listening to it, John
Listening to
Sterling, and we're both big baseball fans.
Yeah, me too. Unfortunately, I'm a Cubs fan for my own sins.
I'm a
So
Cubs fan.
yeah,
So I have season tickets.
yeah. So unfortunately, this season is just
Oh, it's terrible.
Yeah.
I can't believe what they're doing to us.
yeah. So we'll see. But that's more people are coming, so I'll stop the baseball talk. We can talk about that later.
Let's talk about football. I mean, Premier League today, right?
I'm not a football fan.
Oh, I am.
Sorry, sorry. So, from a standpoint of how comic books are essentially have been so influential over the last over 20 years now in mass media, as creators of some of the most influential books, do you feel that there has been a knockback into comics for popularity? So the sales have transferred. So, say for example, the Marvel films have done so well, the DC films have done so well. Does that translate into your books getting into more hands, do you feel?
I don't know about that so much
Yeah.
as I don't know if I think the like nerd culture is just more ubiquitous in a good way, and like watching my own kids, they're not as keen. I mean, they get such a fill of DC and Marvel through TV and movies. They're always interested in sort of checking in on what's going on, but I think they're much more comfortable finding things they can lose themselves in that are their own as well. So there's so many avenues to find comics and such a broad landscape now. You know, when I was coming in after Brian, I think there was a really rich landscape, but it still was more rarefied. You know, it was more, you had to look for it. Now it's such a part of the mainstream in so many ways, like from the adaptations of so many indie comics to the superheroes kind of being every nook and cranny of every mythology explored on television. They're just awash in it, so I think it's just part of their lexicon in the way it wasn't for us. Like, I just remember ordering, like a Spider-Man toy from Japan because it was a figure that was very articulated, and now it's like you can't throw a rock without hitting 800 versions of like Black Canary and much less known characters. So it's wonderful to see. But I just mean, I don't know that it's so much that the movies have a direct impact so much as this kind of broader popularity of everyone kind of flying their own geek flag and that stuff. And it's great to see, I mean, they really find their own way through comics all the time.
Yeah, I mean, as a fan of comics myself and a fan of both your work, it is nice to always see when you're looking at something in a film, TV series, or any form of media outside of comics that has adapted any of those stories, and you can actually see, well, that's directly from an Azzarello book, or that's directly from a Snyder book. Does that give you guys a buzz in any way to see that? Are you happy to see that as long as you get the check in the door for the actual reference?
The check would be nice.
I mean, I can be a sucker for that, but it's nice, like, because it takes a few years for stuff to start to work its way in. Yeah. So, having seen a lot of influence from Brian's stuff and the films, and getting to go and see them use stuff from our run it's like, this is my favorite Batman movie. All of a sudden, as soon as he put in the contact lens, I was like, I love this movie. Yeah. I don't care what else happens.
See, and that's the way they want you to feel.
I know. I'm a sucker for it.
Yeah.
But
See that you have the joy and the hope. Brian has got the realism and the it's like I know how the system works, so this isn't But I mean, like, there still has to be a buzz about it, or else you wouldn't do what you do. There's definitely a love.
I disagree with that.
Really?
Yeah. I do what I do because I really love writing comics.
Well, that's what I meant. Sorry, apologies. That's what I meant.
Whatever happens beyond comics that doesn't really have anything to do with me. I do it because I like the work. That's all.
And because your bibliography or your published works are so extensive at this stage, if you were to look back, because obviously, I mean, for me, if I was to pick anything from your 100 Bullets for me always stands out. But do you look back on something and say, I am always going to be proud of how that turned out, or how that was not received, but how it worked out for me as a writer and as a creator?
Yeah, of course. I think the ones that stand out, though, to me, are the ones that didn't work out so well. Wow. That's what you always think about the mistakes.
That's very, very true. And like Scott, same to you. Like, do you have something that would stand out in your work that you was like, that's my peak there. I'm so happy with everything there.
Yeah, I know that scares me.
I know.
That scares me.
What is your?
I don't know. No, I mean, I'm proud of all of them. You know what I mean, in different ways. But I agree with what Brian said. I think the ones that you struggle on, you grow on. For me. So I think and I mean, again, I wasn't sort of exaggerating about the influence that he's been on me and other people. I came in at a time, I think, of a big inflection point in comics where there's, again, a lot of interest, a lot of money, a lot of corporate sort of injection of like capital and all of it with the New 52 and all of that. And there was just a lot of excitement about how high they were going to sell. And I remember very vividly being at my first DC Summit and being like terrified. It was me and Lemire, we were both like baby deer, wandering around and going up to Brian, who I was obviously, looked up to hugely, and was talking about what I was going to do on Detective at the time. And he was great about just saying, whatever you do, like, stick to your plan. Don't let everything happening with Grant and the New 52 and everything there make you feel like you have to chase sales or any of that. And those kinds of priorities, I've tried to follow over the years, and I think that's what lends itself to making yourself as prouder of the things that you struggled on and it didn't quite work out, but you learned, or that worked out in their own way, but you learned from. Sometimes the ones that people think worked out are the ones that you are most frustrated with, I think, deep down too. And those like, because it makes you know you still care. It makes you know you still want to be better. I mean, I teach this class now that I love. It's silly, but it's like the highlight of my month, like doing this comic writing class. And thank you. Awesome. I'm glad you're in it. The golden rules of the class are the same that I always used to teach, that I had from a good teacher when I was coming up, which are, you always have to write the story that you'd like to pick up and find the most that day. And you have to do your best to remain the most exciting writer to yourself at all times. And that second part to me is about being able, it would be very easy for both of us at this point, I think, to be like, sure, go back and write Batman or write, for Marvel, or even in the indie world, do things that are sort of very big comfort food for fans, like having worked on certain characters like Batman or worked events for a long time. You just get muscle memory. I know how to, and Brian does too, how to kind of get them in the seats, or how to throw some red meat to the fans in some ways, and then also do what you want to do. But, I think both of us really try our best in our own different ways to, just to stay exciting to ourselves. And that means maybe really embracing kind of the ones that, or trying things that you might not be able to do well, but still giving it a shot.
So I'm just going to ask one more question. I'm going to open it to you guys. Then there's microphones here and here, so you can ask your questions. So talking about, like, saying you have the hooks that you definitely would put into certain stories for certain characters. Have you felt that you've been able to do that and also tell the stories you've wanted to tell over the years with established characters like Batman, like Joker, like Superman, like outside of your own independent stuff, like stuff that you created yourself? Have you ever felt constricted by those characters, or have you always felt free to be able to write the way you want to write?
I think things have gotten more constrictive.
Oh yeah, much more.
The more this goes mainstream, the tighter, the company wants to hold on to these characters.
You find weird moments, like, I think we were both really lucky, or I'll speak for myself, like I was lucky in that I came in at a moment when the attention on Batman was elsewhere. It was really on Grant, rightly so, with like just dazzling, epic, legendary run, and Pete, just other areas. So it's those moments when you get lucky and they're like not paying attention quite as much and let you do things that you want to do. And then even on the New 52, for me, I mean, it was like Bob Harris and them, we joke about it now, but like, when they put me on there when I was super green, like I had only had a year on Detective and did not deserve that book, and was terrified of that fact. It's like baseball reference, but being single A and then suddenly like the lowest sort of level of professional baseball, and then somebody's like, you're going to pitch in the World Series in Game 7 tonight, and you're just like, I'm not ready to live my dream at this point. But then like they had Greg Capullo on the book, who they were like, you could write the phone book and not really screw it up. And they also had, they weren't worried about, they were like, you can't screw it up that bad. So that gave me an opportunity to tell a longer form story and gave me freedom. And then once you get to a certain level, like Brian and me, I think they give you more latitude. But coming in now, looking at it and seeing what creators go through, I think there's pockets, there's areas where they want to experiment with the characters, but because it really has changed in 10 years. I mean, Iron Man, I remember seeing Iron Man in the movies and being like, this is really going to change things, and then watching that universe develop into something that was so multifaceted and wonderful. I loved going as a fan. But, in DC expanding too, that I think you knew in some way that the thing was just going to be also constrictive in some ways in comics. Like they need certain books to do certain things now, and it doesn't mean follow the movies. It just means hit a certain level of sales, always be, and because they have their bosses. I mean, not to talk too long on it, but the thing is, like, when I was coming in, DC was just DC Comics, same as him. It was in New York. Marvel was Marvel, and then in that very first couple of years, they were bought by Warner Brothers. They were bought by Disney. Then Warner Brothers was bought by AT&T, and then they sold to Discovery Plus, and that level of corporate investment doesn't always translate to them coming down and saying everybody now has to have an AT&T phone in your comic, but it comes down to your bosses sometimes being hyper aware of their own vulnerability within a very volatile system, and that can mean them wanting to play it safer, and that can be frustrating.
And just on that, like obviously with all the controversial Warners at the moment, with the way they're just slashing projects, do you think that's going to translate into books? Do you think that'll even filter down into anything?
Man, I don't think they have any room to slash anything anymore.
Yeah, I agree with that.
I mean, they're bare bones right now.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I think, it's a really weird moment too. If there are any aspiring comic book creators out there, it's kind of a fascinating thing to be a part of and also watch, where the whole ecosystem of it has changed so much, where I think when I was coming in, it was like you had stability at DC and Marvel, and then you could kind of carve out your area to do a small indie book if you wanted, in your own way. But now DC and Marvel, they don't do the kind of contracts that they used to do quite as much, the exclusive contracts. There's less stability there among editors. There's a lot of moving around, and that's just a fact of them, again, being, I think, part of a larger corporate system. But the thing that's both exciting and scary if you're out there wanting to make comics is there's more opportunity out there than ever to make your own comic in all kinds of ways. It doesn't mean it's going to work, but you've got, self-funded stuff, you've got Kickstarter stuff, and then you've got all these companies that didn't exist 15 years ago that take varying degrees of your rights, so you have to be hyper aware, I think, of like what you want. Like I made a deal with Vertigo when I came in, for ancillary rights for American Vampire that was terrible, where I finally am getting them back like this year after 15 years, But I'm glad I made that deal. I would not change a thing about it. I had great partners there, and that's what got me in. But my point is simply, there weren't many varieties of deal back then. You know, you would either kind of go to Vertigo or DC or a place where they would take the stuff, and there wasn't a lot of transparency, or you went out on your own and you owned everything like an Image. Now there's just dozens of companies, from Boom to Vault to what Dark Horse is starting to do more too, IDW, where Doyle is another dear friend from Vertigo. And so you can go out there and make a comic in all these ways, and there's more opportunity than ever. There's just less stability. So there's like a pervasive, I think, excitement and an anxiety right now to the whole endeavor. That's kind of great and awful all at once. You know?
I can speak as an independent comic book trader. I run an independent label here in Ireland with 2 other people, and we've got a large cadre of creators, and I can totally speak to that as somebody who it's put together a label together ourselves. We self-publish, so it is a very tough thing to do, and it is a very daunting thing to do. So I completely agree with what you're saying. Right, do you folks have any questions? Yeah, you can jump over to the microphone there.
All right.
Yeah, or you can shout it. We're close enough.
Or you can do both.
Cheers.
Ooh.
First of all, it's awesome to have you both over here. And I know there's not like tons of us, but like after COVID and everything, it's really special to have both of you travel all the way over and see us again. I just want to extend a bit of gratitude.
Well, thank you.
Thank you.
I'm so happy to be here.
Me too. I was so happy he was going to be here too. I saw.
My
happy you're gonna
question refers a bit to one of Scott's classes, but it's something hopefully both of you can chime in on. One of the classes was on villains, and I would like to hopefully cast you back to when you were writing your first kind of comics and writing your first villains. When you were writing those kind of the first villains in your career, did you struggle not to write some of the deepest, darkest parts of your own into them? Or what did you draw on to create a great villain when you were starting, as opposed to now that you've learned all the lessons of the trade and you're now both thankfully sharing them with people, but where were you when you were first creating those villains? Cheers.
You want to start?
No, go ahead.
I think I would caution you not to mine your deepest fears for your villains. I mean, I think, for me, both in my own, like in the indie stuff that I did, but if you look at Batman at that time, I think the big misstep you can make when you're on like an iconic villain like Joker or any of them is to not use them in such a way that, like Brian was saying, they are silly putty as well in a certain way, for you to be able to inject the things you're most afraid of into them and make Batman make you brave in the face of those things, So, for example, like coming on, Detective, James Jr. on that was all sort of a projection of that's a story, for example, it's a story about Dick Grayson, who's Batman's, first Robin, becoming Batman while he's gone. And and I wanted to write something where my biggest fear at that time was suddenly getting Batman and, ruining my whole career because I wasn't ready for it. It was my dream. Since I was a little kid, there's nothing more I wanted to do than get into comics and write comics, and Batman's always been my favorite character. And now here I am, and I only had 3 issues under my belt of American Vampire when I got hired to do Detective full time. And so it sounds ridiculous, but that story is about the city changing itself into an enemy for Dick Grayson, and that's the theme of the whole story, is the city adapting and producing villains that are literally extensions of his own greatest fears. And so James Jr. in that story, Dick is a character who's excessively compassionate, empathetic. He's, kind of a lot of the beating heart, at least in my version of him, of the Bat family. And so to create a character that was the inversion of that in James Jr., who was the son of Gotham and yet had no empathy whatsoever and believed that sociopathy was the next evolutionary step of man, was a reflection of that. So what I'm trying to say is that the story was about the environment you're in adapting to be your absolute sort of biggest antagonist, where it's producing villains constantly that are, everything you're afraid of. And that's how I felt, that I was afraid of going on Batman and having it suddenly be all these things I wished it was and were hoping for would be terrifying and awful, and I'd be terrible, like horrible at it. So do you know what I'm saying? And every story was like that. I mean, Death of the Family is a really quick, easy example where we were pregnant with our second kid, and my career was finally taking off, and it was causing tremendous disruptions in our marriage, because when we got married, I really felt like, I remember telling my wife, I was like, I'm never gonna make any money at what I do, but I love it. And, you know, hopefully I'll break in a way that will at least allow me to do it regularly. And she had a real job, she's a doctor. And so when things started to take off for me, our careers kind of crashed into each other, and it caused a lot of, you know, the rockiest time in our marriage. And then they were like, do you want to do your biggest story yet? You can use the Joker, who I'd been sort of saving. And so that Joker comes in and he says to Batman, I've been watching you, and I know that you don't want a family. Deep down, you just want to go back to being you and me. And if I'll show you beneath this face that looks like it's made of flesh is a clown, like is the Joker card. And beneath your face is a bat. And if you be vulnerable to all these people that say you should be human and they love you and this, you're nothing. And you should embrace your career. You're who you are. So point being, the things that have done the best for me and that I'm most proud of are the ones where you really do hit a nerve of tapping into your own fears and producing villains that are personifications of those things.
I just try and make them interesting. I mean, I don't know if I've ever, I was thinking about the question, it's like, man, I don't know if I've ever written a hero. You know, as a, you know, in the, you know, iconic sense. Like, I think I've always written, I don't want to call them villains, even like Lex Luthor, he wasn't a villain. To me, I mean, he's a villain, but I mean, I tried to make you understand why Lex thinks the way he does. You know, and he's a flawed human being, like we all are. So that's kind of the way I've treated villains. And like 100 Bullets was full of like bad people. So yeah, I should think about writing some hero. I guess Wonder Woman was a hero. Okay, yeah, okay, her. Yes, that's one. I mean, Batman's so screwed up when I write him for the most part. You know, he's just like, he's never left that alley. You know, so.
He thinks that's what makes your villains and heroes, so because there's a groundedness to them, because there's flaws, and it makes them less of a caricature.
Look, if I had a superpower, I would be a villain. I can tell you, for sure. I would not use it for good. I would be completely, you know, self-interest. That's it. And I think that's one of the things about some of the villains that work for me are ones that actually are trying to do something that makes sense, like rob a bank. Take over the world? That doesn't make any sense to me. Who wants to take over the world? There's a guy in Russia that might want to take over the world.
Oh, he's crazy.
I can think of a few comic creators.
Yeah, okay,
imagine who would take over the world. But yeah.
Any other questions? We can take, if you've got another question, we actually have time for one more question. So do we have one up the back? Oh, lovely, you're right there. Sorry, the crew t-shirt confused me. Go right ahead.
Okay. I have a question from Facebook. So Jack Foley asks, what do you think of the new phases in the MCU?
The new what?
The new phases in the MCU.
Oh, I have no idea.
I'm saying, like, I think it's wonderful what they've been able to do, and I'm always there as a fan, you know, to things that sound exciting, but it's such a separate thing in a way that I think both of us are really focused on comics, you know.
I haven't seen a Marvel movie. I saw Logan. I like that one.
Logan's awesome.
Logan's a good one.
Logan's
Until the third
best.
act, it falls apart, but you know that happens in these movies.
I completely forgot we were actually streaming this as well.
Well, then we've seen every Marvel movie.
No, I
and
haven't
loved
seen it.
every
I've
Marvel
seen
movie.
zero.
Yeah. No, look, honesty is the best policy. Yeah. Do you want just a microphone just behind you there if you want to? Because shout away.
Out of all the characters you've both created and written, what one do you feel you more connect to personally?
Of characters we created.
Any of the characters you've written.
Right. I mentioned Luther. That was like writing my diary. I mean, I agree with everything he believes. Superman's a menace. I don't know. I'm probably characters that I've killed in 100 Bullets are the characters that I'm the closest to.
I don't know that I have ones that I mean, they're all, I know it sounds hokey, but they all have, you know, big pieces of you in them in different ways. I mean, the most autobiographical ones I think are Charlie and Witches. That was sort of all my fears about fatherhood and sort of pitfalls, like written very honestly on the page in some ways. So, I mean, I think the key for me is like, you know, trying to go for that level to some degree with each project, but you translate it sometimes into the language of like comic book lunacy. So like something even as out there and as kind of bombastic and ridiculous as metal or death metal, those like death metal is a deeply personal like story about what I wish comics would do, you know, about, especially written in a time when things were so difficult and dark during COVID, about embracing the idea that all stories, every story, if you've read one story, you're a fan, and that every story you've ever read counts in one way or another, and creating a universe that would reflect that. But you read it and it's Wonder Woman with an invisible chainsaw and bat dinosaurs, and so you might not take it as the personal story, but under that matrix of demands of writing an event, you learn how to do that. So like for me, probably the most personal Batman story, or the thing that I can think of as like, was Zero Year, because I wrote that one for my kids, and the project was like, you know, redo the origin. They're doing the new 52, you know, there's pressure to do it and that stuff. And I was like, I didn't want to do it until one day my kid, he's here, he's 15, he's coming later. But at the time he was like 4 or 5, and he was at school and they had a lockdown drill for shooters, active shooters. And they didn't realize he was getting water from the water fountain. And so they locked him in the hallway, and then he would never go back to school without a thermos the whole rest of the year. He would never go to the bathroom. He was terrified. And I remember just being like, well, year one spoke to me so deeply as somebody growing up in New York City. It felt so real and immediate and resonant that what if we did our own version of that was about the fears that I see my kids grappling with that are very different than the ones I had. And so that book is done maximalist and hypercolor and all those things to set it apart. And it's got Riddler bots and Batman fighting a lion and all of the most ridiculous stuff that I had done in Batman at that point. So it doesn't seem personal at all. But the villains in it, you know, the Red Hood is an extension of gun violence. The way the Riddler takes over the city is an extension of the fears that we had at that time, particularly in New York, about terrorism and all these kinds of things. So again, I think the point is, they're all personal. You just sometimes you learn how to channel it into different ways so that it might be more or less obvious, you know, in that way. So the ones that sometimes look the least personal might be the most, and the ones that seem the most, you know, can be equally no more so than another one.
Thank you. Okay, folks, we're going to wrap it up there. Thank you so much for coming in. Please put your hands together for Brian Azzarello and Scott Snyder.
Thank you guys for getting up and coming. Like, I would echo what Brian said. Like, I haven't been here. John Hendricks was pointing out last night. I was like, oh yeah, when I was here, you were pregnant with your kid. And he was like, no, that was like 2 kids ago. And I was like, oh my God, I can't believe how long it's been. But I think we sat in this auditorium last time, and you've such great fans over here. And thank you so much for having us and for showing up here, but especially for hosting us over here so kindly in Ireland.
We're glad to have you. You're both going to be at your tables because of the spacing and the way everything is being done. There is a comic book guest section in the artist alley, but you guys are going to be in with the media guests. You've got your own separate tables. Yourself, the 2 of you guys, and Will Slaney are in there with the guests on the media, and then the comic book guest section around the other side as well. So do come check everyone out on the floor, and I take it you guys will be at your tables throughout the day, signing things and having chats. So thanks very much, folks, and on to the next.